the account I was talking to wasn't the one I thought it was. I didn't realize that at first. Everything about it looked completely normal. The name, the photos, the posts, nothing stood out in any obvious way. It was just someone I had added a few days earlier after a short conversation that didn't seem unusual. We started messaging casually, nothing intense, just normal back and forth. The kind of conversations you don't really think about afterward. They replied quickly, always in a clear, straightforward way. No weird questions, no pressure, nothing that would make you stop and think twice. Their profile matched everything they said. The photos looked consistent, the comments under their posts seemed real, and there were even tagged pictures with other people. It felt like a normal account run by a real person. After a couple of days, we were still talking. It wasn't anything serious, but it was consistent. That's probably why I didn't question it. At some point, I got curious and clicked on one of the tagged profiles in their photos. That's when something didn't line up. Not in an obvious way, but enough that I stopped scrolling and went back to look again. It was someone who showed up in a few of the photos on the account I'd been talking to. At first, I was just curious, trying to see how they were connected. The profile looked normal. Photos, comments, recent activity. Nothing unusual. Then I noticed the person I'd been talking to was tagged in one of their latest posts. It had been uploaded earlier that day. Just a group photo outside, somewhere like a cafe. Nothing about it stood out except the timing. At that exact time, I had been messaging that account. I went back to our chat and checked the timestamps again. There was no gap. Whoever I was talking to had been replying normally while that photo was supposedly taken. I tried to brush it off. People post things later all the time. It didn't prove anything yet. Still, I kept scrolling through the tagged profile. More photos, more tags. The same person kept appearing, the one whose account I had been talking to. Same face, same name. Everything matched. I went back to the account I was messaging and started comparing, switching between the two profiles, checking photos more carefully this time. After a few minutes, something started to stand out. Some of the photos were identical. Not similar. Exactly the same. Same angle, same lighting, same people in the background. But they weren't posted at the same time, and they didn't have the same interactions. On one account, the photo had normal engagement. Comments, tags, people interacting. On the other, it felt flatter, less activity, slightly different captions. Sometimes no comments at all. I kept checking, looking for a simple explanation. There wasn't one. At that point, I went back to the chat. He had sent another message while I was looking through everything. Just something casual, continuing the conversation like nothing had changed. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the real profile again, the one from the tagged photos, and started paying more attention to the details. The comments felt more natural. People addressed them directly, referenced things that weren't in the posts, felt grounded in a way the other account didn't. Then I noticed the username. It wasn't exactly the same. Close enough that I hadn't caught it before, but slightly different. A missing character, a small variation. The kind of change you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. I went back to the chat again and looked at the account I had been talking to. That's when it clicked. I wasn't talking to the person in those photos. I was talking to someone using their account as a template. The profile I had been messaging wasn't obviously fake. It was built well enough to pass at a glance. The photos lined up, the posts made sense, and if you didn't compare it to anything else, it looked real. I stared at the screen for a bit, trying to process it. Part of me wanted to just block the account and forget about it. That would have been the easiest option. but another part of me wanted to be sure, to remove any doubt. So I went back to the real profile and sent a message. I kept it simple. I mentioned the account I had been talking to and asked if it belonged to them. While I waited, I switched back to the other chat. They were still messaging. Not constantly, but enough to keep things going. Same tone, same style, like nothing had changed. No hesitation, no sign that anything was off on their side. I didn't answer. A few minutes later, I got a reply from the real account. It was short. They said they didn't know what I was talking about. Just that. Almost at the same time, another message came through from the fake account, continuing the conversation like everything was normal. I looked between the two chats. One of them was clearly real, the other one wasn't, and both of them were active at the same time. I stayed on the screen for a while, going back and forth between the conversations, reading the messages again like I had missed something the first time. But nothing changed. The situation was exactly what it looked like. I opened the fake profile again and started going through it more carefully. Now that I knew what I was looking at, everything felt different. The posts, the photos, the way it all fit together. It looked constructed. Not random, not copied all at once, but built piece by piece to look believable. I scrolled slower this time, checking small details I had ignored before. There were patterns I hadn't noticed earlier, gaps that didn't quite make sense, small things that on their own meant nothing, but together didn't feel right anymore. Then I went back to the chat again. No new messages. I waited, expecting another one to come through, but nothing did. I tapped on the profile again. For a second it didn't load. Then it refreshed, and something about it wasn't the same anymore. The photos were gone. The layout was still there, but empty. No posts, no tags, nothing that matched what I had just been looking at minutes before. I went back to the chat. The conversation was still there, but the profile picture had disappeared. The name at the top hadn't changed, but without the photo, it felt disconnected from everything I had just seen. I tapped on the profile again. This time, it barely loaded at all. Just a basic page. No content, like the account had been wiped or abandoned mid-conversation. I stayed there for a bit, expecting something to update or come back, but nothing did. No new messages, no typing indicator, no sign that anyone was still there. After a while, I backed out of the chat and just left it. I didn't try to message it again. I blocked the account, even though there wasn't much left to block, and closed the app. Later that night, I checked the real profile one more time. Everything was exactly the same as before. The same posts, the same photos, the same tags. Nothing missing, nothing out of place. It was like the other account had never existed in the first place. I never found it again after that. When I got there, he was already outside, leaning against his car, not on his phone, not looking around, just standing there like he'd been waiting for a while. We had only been talking for a few days after matching on a dating app. Nothing serious, just a few normal conversations that didn't really stand out. He seemed quiet, but not in a bad way. He didn't overshare, didn't ask anything strange, didn't try too hard to keep the conversation going. That was probably why I agreed to meet him. We picked a place that I already knew, a cafe in a busy area, always crowded in the evenings. It felt like the safest option, easy to leave if I needed to. He didn't argue about the location or suggest anything else, just agreed and asked what time worked for me. We didn't talk much on the day of the date, just a short message to confirm we were still meeting. No small talk, no build-up. He looked exactly like his pictures. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was that he didn't say much when I walked up. Just a quick hello, then a pause, like he was waiting for me to decide what happened next. We went inside and found a small table near the back. It was loud enough that you had to lean in a little to talk, but still normal for that time of night. For the first few minutes, everything felt exactly like you'd expect from a first date. Basic questions, short answers, nothing too personal. He kept his responses brief, not awkward, just minimal. Most of the time he was watching rather than talking. Not in a nervous way, more like he was paying attention to things around us. After a while, he glanced around and said it was louder than he expected, then mentioned we could go somewhere quieter. He didn't insist, just said it casually and waited. I hesitated for a second and asked where. He said it wasn't far, just a short drive. I remember thinking it wasn't a big deal. We had just met, but nothing about him had felt wrong enough to make it a clear no. The place was crowded, easy to leave, and everything up to that point had been normal. So I agreed. We walked back outside together. His car was parked a little further down the street, not directly in front of the cafe. I hadn't noticed it when I arrived. He unlocked it and got in without saying much. I got in on the passenger side. He started driving, and we kept talking. The same kind of surface-level conversation as before. Nothing deep, nothing uncomfortable. Just enough to fill the silence. A couple of turns later, I realized I didn't recognize where we were going. It wasn't far from the cafe, but it wasn't anywhere I knew either. The streets were quieter now, with less traffic and fewer people. I asked where we were heading. He said it was just up ahead, then changed the subject almost immediately. I didn't push it at first. I figured maybe I just didn't know the area well. But after another minute or two, it became harder to ignore. We weren't getting closer to anything that looked like a place you'd stop. No shops, no lights, nothing that looked open. The buildings were more spread out now, and most of the houses looked dark. I glanced down at my phone without really thinking about it. The signal was still there, but weaker than before. I asked again, this time more directly. He didn't answer right away, just kept driving. After a few seconds, he said, "It's not much further," without looking at me. The way he said it felt different from before. More flat, less like part of a normal conversation. I shifted slightly in my seat and looked ahead. The road stretched out in front of us, with no clear destination. "I think I'd rather just go back," I said. He didn't respond. As we approached an intersection, he slowed down slightly, then kept going straight. That was the point where it stopped feeling like a bad date and started feeling like something else. I looked at him again, trying to read something in his expression, but he wasn't looking at me. His eyes stayed on the road. I checked my phone again, this time more deliberately. The signal was still there, but barely. I didn't like how far we had gone without stopping. "Can you just take me back?" I asked. No response. The car kept moving at the same steady speed. The silence felt heavier now, like the conversation we had earlier didn't exist anymore. I looked out the window again. The streetlights were spaced farther apart, leaving longer stretches of darkness between them. There were no other cars nearby, no one walking, nothing to break the pattern. I said it again, louder this time. "Can you stop the car?" He let out a slow breath and tightened his grip on the wheel for a moment. Then he eased off the accelerator slightly. Not enough to stop, just enough that I noticed the change. I leaned forward a little, looking past the windshield, trying to see if there was anywhere ahead that made sense to stop. But there wasn't. The road just kept going. "I'm serious," I said. "Just stop." He shook his head slightly, like he disagreed with something I hadn't said out loud. "We're almost there," he said. That was the second time he'd said that, and it didn't mean anything. At that point, it wasn't about where we were going anymore. It was the fact that I had asked him to stop more than once, and he hadn't. I reached for the door handle without thinking. It was locked. I didn't try to open it again. I just kept my hand there for a second, then pulled it back. The car slowed a little more as the road curved, but it didn't stop. Everything felt controlled in a way that didn't make sense anymore. Not rushed, not random, just moving forward like this had already been decided. I looked ahead again, trying to see anything that would explain where we were going, but there was nothing. Just another stretch of road, darker than the last. And him, still driving like nothing had changed. I didn't say anything else after that. Instead, I took my phone out again and pretended to check something. I told him I needed to send a quick message, keeping my voice as normal as I could. He didn't react, just kept driving. A few seconds later, I said I had to get something from my bag and asked if he could pull over for a second. This time, he slowed down more noticeably. There was a short pause, like he was thinking about it. Then he finally turned onto a side street and brought the car to a stop. The moment it stopped, I didn't wait. I opened the door and stepped out immediately, not even looking back at him. I just walked straight toward the main road, trying not to move too fast, but not slow either. I heard the car engine stay on behind me for a few seconds. Then it drove off. I didn't turn around. I stayed on the main road until I found a place that was still open and went inside. I didn't message him again, and he never tried to contact me after that. I listed an old gaming console for sale a few weeks ago. Nothing rare or expensive, just something I didn't use anymore. I put it up on Facebook Marketplace and didn't think much of it. I've sold things like that before, and it's usually straightforward. A few hours later, someone messaged me. His profile looked normal enough. No red flags, no weird photos, just a name and a couple of basic posts. He said he was interested and asked if it was still available. The way he typed was calm, almost a bit too neutral, but I didn't think anything of it at the time. He mentioned he wasn't from my city, but said he could come by the next day if everything worked out. That wasn't unusual either. People travel for deals all the time, especially if the price is good. At some point, he asked what area I was in. I gave him a general location, nothing specific. He replied pretty quickly after that, saying he knew the area and that it was usually quiet at night. That was the first thing that felt slightly off. Not enough to worry me, just enough to stick in my head for a second before I ignored it and kept the conversation going. We kept talking about the console, agreed on a price, and loosely planned for him to come by the next day. After that, the conversation shifted back and forth between small details. He asked where it would be easiest to park, and I told him there was usually space along the street. A few seconds later, he mentioned that the street looked narrow and that parking might be tight at night. That caught my attention a little more. I hadn't told him the exact street. just the general area. It was possible he was guessing, or maybe just speaking generally, but it didn't feel like a guess. It sounded specific. I paused for a bit before replying, then just said it should be fine. He didn't push it further. Instead, he asked what time worked best for me. We settled on some time in the evening, though nothing exact. The whole thing still felt normal enough on the surface, but there was something about the way he responded. Quick, precise, almost like he already knew what I was going to say. A few minutes later, he sent another message. This time, it wasn't a question. He said something about there being a small open area nearby where people sometimes parked. That wasn't something you'd really notice unless you were actually there. I stared at the message for a while, trying to figure out if I had mentioned it without realizing. I hadn't. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe he had zoomed in on the map. Maybe it just looked like that from above. Still, I didn't respond right away. Around that time, I got up to grab something from the kitchen. My place faces the street, and out of habit, I glanced through the window as I walked past. There was a car parked across from my building. That by itself wasn't unusual, but it stood out because of how it was positioned. It wasn't fully parked along the curb like the others. It was slightly angled, like someone had pulled over but hadn't fully settled in. I didn't think much of it at first. Cars come and go all the time. I went back to my phone and saw that he had sent another message. He asked if I lived in a building or a house. That was the first time I hesitated before answering. Up until then, I'd been replying normally. But something about the timing felt off. I had just noticed the car, and now he was asking for a detail like that. I kept my answer vague. I told him it was a building, nothing more. He replied almost instantly, saying something like, "Got it." Then nothing. Just that. I put my phone down and sat there for a minute, listening. The apartment was quiet. I couldn't hear anything from outside, but I kept thinking about that car. After a while, I got up again and looked out the window. It was still there. I stood there a little longer this time, trying to see inside, but the windows were too dark. I couldn't tell if anyone was in it. I went back to the chat and scrolled up again, reading everything more carefully. The comments about the area, the parking, the way he had described things that I hadn't actually told him. It all felt slightly off on its own, but together, it didn't sit right. I decided not to respond anymore for a bit. A few minutes passed, then my phone buzzed again. He asked if everything was still good for the next day. The message looked completely normal. I didn't answer. Instead, I looked back outside. The car hadn't moved. At that point, it wasn't about whether it was him or not. It was the possibility that it could be. I realized I had already told him enough. The area, the time, the fact that I'd be home in the evening. Even if it wasn't the same person, I didn't like how much information was already out there. I picked up my phone, went back to the chat, and blocked him without replying. Then I went back to the listing and took it down completely. I stayed by the window for a while after that, just watching. Nothing changed for at least 10 minutes. Then, without any obvious reason, the car started up. No lights at first, just the engine. It sat like that for a few seconds, then slowly pulled away and drove off. I didn't recognize the car. I didn't see the driver. It just disappeared down the street like it had been there for no reason at all. I never heard from that account again.